Hello again. Okay, so I've been a Doctor Who fan for a while. Back when it was good. And thought I'd talk about Daleks today. Sort of the, I don't know, penultimate foe of the Doctors. And I've been watching, there's been someone, Doctor Who Classics channel, so I've been watching old episodes that I haven't seen in a while, so. And also, commenting with other fans. As we watch, you got the live stream and you can make comments on the show as you watch it. So I thought I'd share some of what's been going on and just let's discuss them overall. So Terry Nation created the Daleks. Saw an interview him talking about them, and his big thing was he would watch a monster movie and he would know it's a man in costume because they always have, they're basically bipedal, two legs, two arms, whatever. So it was very obvious this is a man in costume, it's not scary. Grew up working, in television or whatever, and went to see the ballet. And the ballet he saw, the women had large, like, I'm not going to say hoop skirts, but that's the best I can describe them without actually going into detail. But big round things, and they would tiptoe across stage, and these big dresses would glide along behind them. And you got the idea that would be that. There's my monster. It's you can't see the legs, but obviously it's moving along. So he created the idea of the Daleks. So second plot arc of Doctor Who, he encounters the Daleks. I'm talking plot arcs here. Basically, early Doctor Who's every episode had its own name, and then when they gathered them later, we started combined story arcs. And so the first one is called the Daleks, even though the episode itself, I believe, is called the Dead City. And then later on, it was just like, okay, we know this is going to be a multi-episode thing, so we will call it this title, episode 1. And so that's, but old days, I'm referring to them as story arcs just because in the old days the episodes all had different names. And so to gather the episodes together, I'm just going to refer to them as story arcs instead of episodes. So the second story arc, they had the first one, An Unearthly Child, where they introduced the Doctor and his granddaughter and the two humans who ran around with them. Next one, we introduced the Daleks. And the Daleks were meant to be a one-shot villain, but everyone liked them, so they brought them back later. It was what, 10, the 10th story arc is when they brought them back, so there was time for people to say, when are you bringing the Daleks back? The TARDIS lands on Skaro. They encounter the Daleks and their enemies, the Thalls. Basically, the Daleks and the Thalls had a nuclear war. The Thalls somehow survived outside of the city. The Daleks survived in the city. And they had made these little carrying cases for themselves, basically. Little life support. And so that's what a Dalek is. The whole, heard them described as pepper pots before, whatever, because they do look sort of like salt cellars or salt shakers. But they are really organic creatures inside these carrying cases, or these survival cases. And that seems to be the biggest problem Doctor Who has had with the Dalek. I mean, when I say Doctor Who now, I'm talking about the show and the production. Is they have to continue to remind people these are not robots. These are creatures inside these survival, I don't know, suits, tanks. I don't know what to call them. They're so I'm And so episode, it's a 6-episode storyline. It ends. They defeat the Daleks. Yay! Let's go home, or go to our next adventure. And like I said, the people liked them, and so got to the 10th story arc. We are in season 2, and they brought them back. The Dalek invasion of Earth, which takes place, I think, sometime in 2060s. I think 2063 or 2064 was the exact year they mentioned. So, about 40 years, 30 to 40 years from now, expect the Daleks to come. So the story there was Earth had its nuclear bomb, or it had a plague of some sort. And people were dying off, and the Daleks came and offered to help. And by helping, they took over. So, now here's the thing. Terry Nation, he told his story about how he created the Daleks. In that same interview, they had a fan group was allowed to ask him questions. And one of the people mentioned, I liked the Daleks until you got to Genesis of the Daleks, and that seemed to mess with the entire timeline. And Terry Nation basically said, you don't know what you're talking about. He, wasn't afraid to insult the fan. Now, I agree with Terry Nation on this. The problem is, they messed with the Dalek timeline in the invasion of Earth. That's when they first started messing with it. So, TARDIS lands on Earth. Daleks have taken over. We find the Daleks are here. I thought we destroyed them. And so the Doctor's explanation is, that happened in the future. This is the past. Or this is your future, but the destruction it's the past of when we last encountered them. That makes sense. Up to a point. So here's where we start to bring in, okay, so the Daleks, according to this new timeline we're giving, they at some point left Skaro, went about the galaxy, invaded Earth, and then they returned to Skaro where they were finally destroyed. So their empire collapsed back to where they were retreated back to Skaro, and then the Doctor destroyed them finally, or... So already, if we want to compare the two episodes, already we're having questions with their timeline. But, people were just excited to have the Daleks back. No one questioned that. It's really not a big deal. A few episodes later, actually the 15th storyline, still in season 2, we have the Space Museum. And in the Space Museum, it didn't have Daleks, but it did have a Dalek casing as one of the exhibits in the Space Museum. So the Daleks aren't gone yet completely. And then the very next storyline, the chase, the Daleks have discovered time travel. And so they are now trying to catch up to the Doctor, and that's the whole plot line of this story arc. So now we've given the Daleks time travel. They can sort of do what they want. We can mess with the timeline all we want. Hooray. Although every time we introduce the Daleks in the future, we are going to act as if they've never met the Doctor before. For a few episodes, at least. Eventually, they're going to get to the point where the Doctor is their worst enemy, and they all know about it. So, if we were to sit down and try to work out the timeline for the Daleks, we might figure out how exactly that worked. But up to this point, they're still not really following a timeline for them. It's just sort of, okay, this happened. There's one we saw recently, the Power of the Daleks, where Earth had colonized Vulcan. Yes, Doctor Who, they colonized Vulcan before Star Trek met the Vulcans. This was filmed sometime in the late 50s. And they had found a pod with Daleks in it there. and Daleks are going to take over. Supposedly, they didn't say it in the episode, but it's supposedly, according to the trailer for that episode, which I have not seen, um, that's supposed to have taken place in 2020. So here we are, 6 years after after we've colonized Vulcan, according to the Doctor Who universe. But so by that timeline, Earth would have colonized Vulcan in 2020. Then 2060s, we're back on Earth, and the Daleks have invaded. Going back to the second storyline with them. So again, the whole Dalek timeline was screwed up before Genesis of the Daleks came out. Now, the great thing about Power of the Daleks is they got back to actually showing what a Dalek looks like in its organic form. Because again, we were getting away from that. And every now and then they would, from time to time, they would do something like a Dalek blows up and there's like an organic goo residue on the outside of it. And that's sort of their way of reminding us, no, this is not a robot, this is something with a creature inside it. And every so often they would come back and remind us of that because they had to, because people kept forgetting. And the writer, there was no real good way for the writers to present that, without continually going back and retelling their backstory, which they didn't want to do. So they had to find ways to remind the audience that this is not a robot, it's actually a creature inside a casing. They were not emotionless. In fact, several episodes or several storylines, they mentioned, not the Daleks themselves, but characters mentioned that they seemed to fear the Doctor. For those times, eventually they started remembering who the Doctor was instead of not having to be reintroduced to him every time they met him. And people mentioned they fear the Doctor. They were capable of panic, although they never called it panic. There was always, whenever someone would attack them and push them off a cliff or something, while the people are getting them, pushing them towards the cliff or the stairs or wherever they're pushing them towards, they would be screaming, what's going on? Help me, whatever. It would basically be, the Daleks would be panicking. Anytime you cover their eye stalk, they immediately start yelling, I cannot see, I cannot see, I cannot see, as if that does anything. That takes us to another thing I noticed about them. So supposedly, they do have a distress signal. And even if they are somehow deactivated, if you mess with the casing, it will emit this distress signal. They mentioned that in one episode. And that's interesting to me because they apparently don't have any kind of radio device. Which again, thinking back, this was originally 1953, 1954. We had radio, but usually it would be 2 or 3 channels, walkie-talkie type thing. So yeah, during the wars and stuff, we could broadcast over multiple things, but we had to have our book of frequencies. During this time, we're going to broadcast on this frequency or whatever. So they would have a limited amount of frequencies they would be using, even if they were using a radio. Telephone at the time was switchboard operator still for the most part, so you couldn't make direct calls. So it's not like they could just send out, communicate. They had to talk to each other. It's not like you'd have 2 Daleks in the same room communicating by radio so no one else could hear them. They would have to actually talk to each other. And that's something they never tried to change, to the best of my knowledge. The closest they came is they have this distress signal they can apparently send out, which they never actually did. That was interesting, to my thought, And I don't think I'd want them to upgrade to where they can communicate with, that would be like giving the Daleks cell phones. And I don't want the Daleks to have cell phones. So we're going to keep it where they have to communicate by talking directly to each other out loud. I like that. Okay, so we get to Genesis of the Daleks, where we introduce Davros. Basically, the other Time Lords sent the Doctor back to try to stop the Daleks from being created. And so we meet their creator, Davros. We find out the Daleks were actually originally called the Kaleds, and Davros called them, just rearranged the letters and started calling them Daleks. We also find out that they hinted that he was trying to remove emotion from them because he wanted them to be more efficient. But again, he never actually succeeded. From all their behavior and all, they still have emotion, no matter how much they try to make them seem mechanical. That's actually sort of fun, is watching for the emotion in the Daleks, because people are expecting them to be emotionless. So they did mention he tried to remove their negative emotions and keep the emotions that were good. I mean, of course, by negative, he means the ones that make them quote unquote weak. And, he never got away with keeping them from panicking if people attack them, or yelling out, "I cannot see," if their eye stalk gets covered somehow. So he failed there. The problem with bringing Davros in, this is what really messed things up, in my opinion, is from now on, Davros appears in every episode. And so, go back in time, try to stop him. The Daleks turn on Davros, but he had, apparently he had some sort of force shield up, and put himself into suspended animation. And so the next Dalek, what do we go? So that was season 12. Season 17, Destiny of the Daleks. And the Daleks have gone back to find Davros because they're at war with another robotic race, with an actual robotic race, I should say. And they're having problems. So they want Davros to help them. So they go back to find his body. And the Doctor, of course, gets there at the same time. And from now on, every episode with the Daleks has Davros in it. And so now they are locked into a timeline because he never goes and meets Davros from 2 weeks ago. It's always a Davros who he has met from the previous Dalek episode. So they actually, instead of screwing up the Dalek timeline like the one fan complained, they actually locked them into a series of timelines. And he never went back to where Davros wasn't with the Daleks. Or at least not in the old series. The newer ones, which I haven't seen most of, they might have started messing around with that. But so far, I have seen a few of the new ones which had Daleks in them, and they all had Davros also. So, apparently, now the Daleks are locked into a specific timeline. There is no going back and seeing the Daleks from in between our last two Dalek episodes. It's now all, this happens after the last Dalek episode, after the last act, it's all one right after the other, or linearly at least. So that is it. Again, if you want the Cybermen, technically not robots either, but they are more robotic than the Daleks. In fact, I think a lot of people some people like the Cybermen better than the Daleks because they were better written as logical, emotionless characters than the Daleks were. That's it. Have a nice day.